Jourdan, we're here to talk about the Playcallers. So tell everybody, what are we talking about here today?
Yes, well, I know that you guys' fan base, very football savvy people, very well informed people, large in part thanks to what you guys do and the work you guys do. But if I were to explain this project to somebody walking down the street, and believe me, I have done that, I would say this show, this series, audio documentary at The Athletic, it's about how football happens, for better or for worse, and everything in between, through the voices, minds, and philosophies of some of the brightest minds in the sport, and certainly those who are all interconnected within the same coaching tree, the youngest coaching tree in the league. Our main characters, of course, in this series are Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniel, and Matt LaFleur. But the ripple effects from some of the decisions they made and the work they did together at such formative times in their coaching careers interconnect with the paths of so many others that are also featured in the show, inclusive to defensive coaches Robert Saleh, Brandon Staley, assistant coaches across the league, players. So it's a series about competition between those coaches, innovation, and basically the decisions that people make at inflection points in their career that shape the arc of the sport and shape what we see in modern football today. Everything from philosophy, scheme, how teams are built, how defenses react to offenses, and certainly how hiring works in the league today.
Yeah, there's some fascinating what if moments in this. Like if there wasn't a snowstorm in New England somewhere and the Rams had actually gotten to interview Kyle Shanahan, the entire NFC West, the entire balance of power in the league could have shifted completely. I was wondering, did the idea or the sort of story that you were looking to tell change throughout the process of this? Like you have the concept, you make the pitch, the guys of The Athletic sign off, you're now, constructing all these interviews, you're talking to these people. Did the story change when you started to get in touch with these guys and get all the interviews wrapped up, or did it pretty much stay along the lines of what you wanted to pitch in the first place?
Well, great question. I actually started forming the idea of this story, of telling this story, the earliest sort of drips of it back in 2020, after I watched Sean McVay and Brandon Staley clash at practice. Obviously, Sean McVay was trying to troubleshoot his offense and figure out what his system needed to look like as other teams had caught up to it. And he went out and hired Brandon Staley, who was going to run the exact defense that proved to be a perfect foil for his offense. And the key part of this for Sean McVay was he could troubleshoot against this thing in practice every single day where nobody else could see it, right? So he could run all of these experiments and sort of game theories, and so could Brandon Staley, and they could do that at a highly competitive level against each other, but no game tape is getting out to all other 31 teams across the league who are curious and sort of trying to figure out what comes next as well. And so when I watched that in person, that was when I really started understanding how systems clash against each other, and also how people clash against each other, but sometimes for constructive ways. And you always knew the story about Sean McVay and Mike McDaniel and Matt LaFleur and Raheem Morris and Kyle Shanahan in Washington, and some of the chaotic functional dysfunction that was happening in those coaching rooms there. And when I watched the way specifically that Sean McVay orchestrated those practices against Brandon Staley, I thought to myself, okay, he's done this before. This type of conflict has been in his life before. It's clear to me why he has sought this out. And so I started digging back and talking to people around those guys and talking to different people over the course of the last couple of years, what actually was going on there? What was it actually like in those rooms, to the point where now I'm starting to build this story and try to figure out what's the best medium for it, right? At a certain point, I started thinking, especially after Zach Kiefer did the Andrew Luck podcast at The Athletic, which was incredible. I thought, what better way to tell this story, or attempt to tell this type of story, than through the voices of the people who actually experience these things? Because it's one thing to read something in print, but to have the story become three-dimensional, to become alive, and in part thanks to our awesome producers, Mike Smeltz and Kent Garrison, I wanted people to feel like they were there, like they really understood that tension, like they really could hear how truly unhinged some of these people can be, but also, how passionate they are and how competitive they are and how that obsessive, relentless pursuit. This is not a praise podcast. This is not a podcast talking about, how great people are. This is a podcast that shows the true dark side of what it can be if you are singular-minded and obsessive in your pursuit of perfection in a game that wants you to be imperfect at every turn.
One of the things interesting to me, Jourdan, too, is I think sometimes we oversimplify, like this coach worked for that coach, who worked for that coach, therefore they're all the same person, they're all the same personality, they all do the same things. But you start to see the differences and how obviously there's a continuity across systems, but they all diverge, right? And they all, because of personalities, or like you're saying, Sean McVay being obsessed with a defense that was shutting down his offense. But the importance of defense and offense in this whole thing, again, we only focus on the offensive part of it, but each person has a different take for what they stole from a defense. Or I always thought that Sean McVay just hired good defensive coaches, but obviously there were ulterior motives that he had there. What did you learn from the intertwined offense, defense, and taking a system and understanding the other side of the ball? Because you're a head coach, you have to be good on both sides.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. You started really seeing, Kyle Shanahan talks about this at length, and so does Raheem Morris, by the way, because Raheem Morris is like, wow, Kyle Shanahan used all this stuff against us later in life. But Kyle Shanahan used to sort of like, I guess there's no other better word for it. He would like lurk in the back of defensive meetings back when he was in Tampa. Yeah. And you got to understand, at that time, he's also logging plays out of the biggest playbook in the NFL at that time with no internet information sharing. Like, you can't PDF file any of these like you can only see it in one place, and that's when you're sitting in the office and you're looking at it. So he has this exclusive access to this knowledge, which also to me was very, by the way, illustrative of where we're at right now in the league in terms of some of the hiring cycles and practices. He has this unique access to this playbook, and he's taking all of that knowledge and he's starting to lurk in the back of these defensive meetings, that Monty Kiffin, Tampa 2 defense, and he's listening to all of them talk and troubleshoot their defense, and he's starting to understand how to manipulate space. So if he knows where they want to put players against an offense, he's starting to think about plays and how those plays can take advantage or force mathematical leverages and spatial leverages against the spacing specifically that the defense is trying to achieve. And that carries forward not only in his teaching of other young assistants that he had, including Sean McVay, which then a couple years later leads to Sean McVay's hiring of Brandon Staley and a ripple effect across the league of those types of defenses. But also, you could see the way that the two sides of the ball are so deeply intertwined through the entire course of the series, because these coaches are bringing in defensive coordinators, Kyle Shanahan and Robert Saleh, who are they're making it okay to fight with each other over these ideas and to truly test one another. So you see it through 2017 into 2019 and 2020 how the development of the wide nine and Robert Saleh actually playing more quarters than he ever had out of that foundation he had of that Seattle cover 3 system. Now you're starting to see his coverage concepts mix up. You're starting to see that wide nine that's built specifically to not only rush the passer really well and with multiplicity, but also cut off the outside zone. And then you start seeing Kyle Shanahan's run game change, more counter, more power, more inside stuff with Mike McDaniel, because he's going against the wide nine in practice every day. And he's seeing how to manipulate space differently against these different looks that he's getting. So that's what we love about the sport, right? That's the coolest stuff ever, is seeing how things react to each other and change. And certainly, of course, the players bringing it to life has been so impactful for some of these coaches. And that's where you get into the complication of being a play caller and knowing you need to empower your players to help you find those ideas on offense and defense. But also that sense of control that is explored throughout the series of all these guys, they crave it, they need it. They need to be in command of what they're doing, whether it's on offense or on defense. They're all that type of personality. And yet you can't be, right? Because you have to let go. You have to cede control to your players at certain points. And you have to cede control to your assistant coaches, specifically on the other side of the ball, because that's the only way that you'll find answers.